Hello everyone, welcome to Rock Ed Camp 2020. My name is AJ Mata. I'll be presenting today on integrating project-based learning into your curriculum. First off, I'd just like to say I hope you and your families are doing well and staying healthy amidst this COVID outbreak here. Unfortunately we couldn't be together and talk about these different topics, but this is the next best thing. So again, just thank you very much for tuning in with me today as we talk about project-based learning. As you read probably in my description, one of my biggest bottom line takeaways today is I want you to be able to transform your learning into intentional, collaborative, student-centered learning environment and how to do that. So as you begin this next school year, I hope that you feel more comfortable and step out and try some project-based learning activities throughout the year. But let's go ahead and get started on how we're going to do that. All right. So again, my name is AJ Mata. I've been teaching at Slippery Rock High School for the past 2 years. I have a very non-traditional route into education, but I think that's part of some of my biggest strengths as an educator as well. In 2014, I graduated from Grove City College with a biochemistry degree. I had a lot of great experiences with project-based learning and labs and different things like that. And I took that experience and went to Duquesne University where I studied medicinal chemistry for about 2.5 years. And again, learned a lot of valuable lessons. And actually some of the same principles that I teach now in my class are some of the same things that I learned in grad school and in undergraduate at Grove City. After leaving Duquesne University, I got started teaching at Butler High School for about 1.5 years as a long-term sub. I taught biology there. So again, using different elements of the design process, something that I teach a lot of, and it's integrated into all of my project-based learning units. Started using some of the scientific method there and really teaching it to kids. But at Butler, one of the things that I kind of dreaded most, and I'm sure some of you feel the same way, is projects as well. Because projects can be very daunting. There's a lot of work that goes into them. Sometimes they're hard to grade, and it just requires a lot of extra work on our part. But hopefully by the end of this unit here, or this seminar, that you'll see that project-based learning actually puts a lot of that on the kids, and it allows them to explore and create. And once you have kind of the template put in place, that it's actually really easy, and it's really kind of refreshing for teachers, but it's also really enriching for the students, which is a great aspect of project-based learning. About 2 years ago, I got hired at Slippery Rock High School to teach the freshman class of Discovering STEAM, which is science, technology, engineering, art, math. So in my class, we talk about a lot of different topics. We cover all the tech electives here at Slippery Rock High School. And, we have a lot of really great electives that, we teach woodshop. We teach a little bit of the CAD programs, drawing and designing, pre-engineering type things. So we really try and do a lot of those types of projects in my classroom. But one of the benefits of teaching the STEAM class is that we do get to do project-based learning pretty much the entire semester that we're together that I'm together with students. That's a little bit about my background and some of my classroom. One of the things that you'll see if you come into my classroom is that I love to have fun, and project-based learning definitely allows me to have fun. It allows the students to have a lot of fun, but it also allows them to have some input in their projects, which I think really increases their buy-in with some of the different topics, which increases their willingness to work and their desire to work and create some pretty cool stuff throughout the entire class. Before I was hired at Slippery Rock High School, like I said, my experience with project-based learning was little to none, actually. I have come up with a lot of different ways to integrate them into my curriculum, a lot of different projects that utilize project-based learning, but it allows me to be fun and be creative and be flexible with my students in order for them to get the most out of each and every project. what I hope that you take away from today, again, is just that you can do this. That project-based learning isn't something that you have to recreate everything on the fly, or even spend weeks in preparation setting up for. Usually, some of the best project-based learning projects are projects that you already do in class, just worked a little bit differently, or maybe designed a little bit differently to fit that project-based learning mold. So throughout this presentation today, we'll be talking about a lot of different steps or different effective elements of project-based learning. So as we go through, I will be talking about those different elements. If you have any questions, I'll leave my email address in the comment box. Please feel free to email me. I'll also leave some of my material in there for one of my units, so that you can kind of gauge and see what it is that I do for each lesson, or for one of my lessons, as we go through this project-based learning seminar. All right, so first off, I just want to talk about the elements of an effective project-based learning environment. The first thing that is really important, and we already do this as educators, is we have to be thorough in thinking out what it is our project is going to accomplish. One of the biggest things that I always think of whenever I'm doing project-based learning stuff is, what skills do I want the kids to learn? Do I want them to learn time management? Do I want them to learn how to be better teammates? Do I want them to learn critical thinking or problem-solving skills, communication, real-time problem solving? What specific skill do I need them to work on? And once I figure out those skills, then I can start to tailor some of those the smaller checkpoints and steps to those skills, and make sure that they fully understand. Is it something that I have to teach beforehand? So maybe there are some days where I do some lecturing and give the kids an idea of maybe the design process, something that we talk about a lot, and that you'll see a lot of in my project-based learning units throughout. Another thing that we have to think about is what guidelines we're going to give the project. There are a lot of times where I want to tell my students exactly what to do and exactly how to do it, and have all these things laid out. But what I found is that some of my best projects are more open-ended. And one of the projects that I'll share with you in the links below are a slingshot rocket project, where I allow the kids, or I give some of the students, or I give all the students some of the information that's necessary, but then I have them come up with all the questions, right? So sometimes I give them little information because I want them to start asking questions and start thinking about what truly matters for that project. Sometimes I will give them timelines. I'll give them a kind of like a deadline day, and I'll sometimes break up the project day by day and say, hey, you should be at this step by this day to be on track. Or to be on task with us. But if you're ahead, that's totally fine. And if you're behind, you have a little bit of work to catch up on, maybe outside of class, or maybe you have to work extra hard on some of these steps during class throughout the week. Another thing that we have to think about is, along with the guidelines, is what objectives do you want to do? So we have to define our objectives clearly. And one of the best ways to do that, I've found, is to use rubrics. So I have a basic rubric template that I use. I just make sure that I change the terminology and some of the language that goes along with those. But I found that having a rubric is really nice because it allows me to go through and objectively go through their projects and give them a score based on that, based on those objectives that I've already laid out. It also goes back to, what skills do I want them to learn? So I also help them, my objectives match my skills. So if I want them to learn the design process, there's 8 different steps. So we'll really work on those 8 steps as an objective throughout these different project-based learning units. The last thing kind of in this kind of guideline situation is how will I make sure the students stay on track? That was one of the hardest things for me to do as I was starting to create some of these projects and figure out what it is that I actually wanted to accomplish. But I found that giving them some guidance, especially as freshmen, is a really good thing. If you teach older level classes, then you may be able to give them some freedom. You might be able to talk about outlines and let them kind of come up with what works best for them. But for me in particular, as I teach freshmen, they need a little bit more guidance as far as what I give them in terms of how they stay on track. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to give them guided worksheets. So I've gone through and created these different worksheets that allow them the space that they need in order to think out their ideas and to kind of put their ideas on paper. But it allows them, or allows me to easily see that they're staying on track and that they're keeping up with the work. If I see a group that's getting really far behind, maybe I'll talk to them and see if they can work on it outside of school or maybe in a study hall or something like that. But the guided worksheets are a great tool to have. And another thing that I like to do is I like to put out these checkpoints and these deadlines and make sure that students are following through with some of the work that they say that they're doing. I think the checkpoint and the guideline system or the deadline system allows students to really have some freedom in their creativity. It doesn't kind of like box them in and say, oh, well, when I get this box checked for the day, then I'm done, right? But by allowing them to kind of set those dates kind of by themselves or set those objectives by themselves, I found that sometimes students actually work above and beyond what they're asked to do in class, which is the goal, right? We want them to be student-centered learning, and we want them to drive their education. So the use of guided worksheets and checkpoints and deadlines is definitely a big help in my classroom. One of the biggest things that I found, and it's something that I've said during my teaching career, is I want students to fail at times, and not in the sense that they have to repeat my class or things like that, but I want them to experience failure, because I think at that point that's when students really start to comprehend and start to really think on their own. One of the things that I found is that I typically don't want to give away to my students all the tips and details and tricks that I know for each of these projects, right? Because if I do that, then they don't really learn anything. They just know how to listen, and they can figure it out from there. But one of the things that I try and integrate into all of my projects is I want my students to be critical thinkers. I'm going to let the students struggle a little bit. They're going to ask me very direct questions or very ambiguous questions, and I'm going to give them ambiguous answers back, right? I want them to think about it and really chew on it and digest it and try and problem solve, because that's what one of my objectives is for each one of my units that I teach. I want them to lean on their understanding and maybe to stretch themselves a little bit. Because I think it makes it more impactful whenever they learn that way. Another thing is, I have students develop these driving questions. So in the link that I'll post below in the comments to one of my projects, you'll see that one of the first things that I have is driving questions. So in this unit for Slingshot Rockets, I have students, I'll introduce the project, I'll talk about it for a little bit, but I am intentionally kind of open with some of the details that I give. And my point behind this is that I want them to start thinking about how teachers design projects, or what is necessary for this project to be successful. And I want them to start thinking about those things, because those driving questions will ultimately help them make their decisions about the design of their slingshot rocket in later steps. So everything that we kind of do in project-based learning, it has a building block effect, right? Where one thing kind of builds into another, and I want to make sure that students really get the full kind of experience as they go through this unit or whatever we're working on for that time. For the execution of the project, again, don't do the projects for the kids. Let them struggle. Let them figure it out. I always say that you learn more from failure than you do from success, right? If things are easy, kids really kind of breeze through it. They don't really think about what they're doing. But if they're struggling with it and they're having a hard time, now they're really thinking about how that machine or how that component works in the entire process of what we're trying to accomplish. So again, it's the hardest thing we have to do, or one of the hardest things I have to do, is I just have to let the students fail sometimes. I have to let them take their bad ideas and run with it for a little bit until they figure out on their own that maybe isn't the best way to do that. There are some instances where, if I know a group is struggling, like, yes, I will come by and I will help them and kind of guide them a little bit more than I would with most students, but that is all, kind of up to your discretion. But I would say in large part, you want the students to struggle a little bit. You don't want it to be an easy process through, right? I think we learn more from failures than our success, like I said. I think this also really helps develop the skills that we want. Like I've been saying, I think it really develops the problem-solving skills and the critical thinking skills, which are used across all curriculum in the schools, right? By developing these, outside the box, maybe solutions to things, right? It teaches them to maybe come up with some outside the box solutions for other problems, maybe in math or algebra or in reading, right? You can come up with all these different ways to solve problems, and I think this allows students to be the most creative as they try and do that. One of the things that, again, that I'm going to reiterate is while you're working on the project, while you're executing it, you really have to make sure students are keeping on track, right? So again, using goals and checkpoints, using those guided worksheets are really going to be really helpful for you. Again, using forms with objectives that are clearly written on them. Maybe you have daily exit tickets, something like that would help you keep track of those times when students are working independently in a small group or by themselves, so you can help keep track of that. Another way that I found is a great way to keep track of that is to have my students actually take a daily scrum meeting. And what that looks like is students at the beginning of class every day for the first 5 to 10 minutes meet with their group or meet with their partner and talk about all the progress that they had made from the day before, right? Each day it allows them to write out their objectives for the day. So I'm going to accomplish X, Y, and Z. And it allows you to check in the next day and say, well, I only accomplished 2 of those things. I really need to accomplish this 3rd thing before I move on, right? And it just helps keep each teammate accountable. And one thing that I do is I have them write down their Scrum meeting notes. And that way I can come around and I can see, A, that they're following along, that everybody knows what's going on with the project, and B, it helps them just organize and prioritize the things that actually need done in the project. Right? So with my guided worksheets, we have all these different steps of the design process, especially for the Slingshot Rocket project that you see in the link. And we have, a good way to check in and make sure each of those things is done for each of the students. Right? And it helps break up the work so that one student isn't doing everything and the other students are just kind of freeloading and taking that for granted, right? So it keeps everybody accountable, and that way I can look back and see, so John didn't really help out with this one, so John's grade can be adjusted slightly because he didn't help out as much with the project that time, right? So it just keeps students accountable. It allows me to easily track some of their progress and see that they're working on their communication skills, verbally and written skills, making sure that they're written in sentence form or things like that, bulleted form, that's fine too. So you can come up with those different guidelines as you go through some of those different things. One of the things that I love to do, especially with the Slingshot Rocket project, is I love to have the kids build their rockets, and then a couple days before we test them, I like to go around and do what's called a gallery walk. So I think in a gallery walk, it allows the students to walk around and see all the other students' designs, right? And after we do our gallery walk, they have a couple, a day or day and a half to modify their rocket and to look like some of these other rockets that students have done, right? Maybe they see a great way or a neat way to attach a hook to their rocket, or a fin shape that they didn't think about that they think might actually work better, right? So it allows students to get some ideas and some feedback on their rockets, right? Because as they go through, they're critiquing all of their classmates' rockets, right? They can write down positive comments or constructive criticism. So this is a chance for students to go through and really critically think about each of the rockets that they're visiting. Do they think this rocket will fly? Why or why not, right? And it allows them to kind of test their driving questions. So some of the questions that students come up with most often are, does length or weight affect the rocket more, right? And what we found is that the smaller the rocket and the heavier the rocket it weighs, the further it goes. So those are all questions that the students can answer, and they can start to see what other people had answered for those questions, right? One group may have a really long rocket that's really light. Another group may have a short rocket but not so heavy. So you can see a lot of different variety of body types and things like that, and different designs for those rockets, which allows students to then start to think, all right, well, if their rocket flies really well, then this is maybe a cause for that, right? So now they can start to see cause and effect and really develop those critical thinking skills. So again, Scrum meetings are awesome for during the projects, helping keep them on track. And then the gallery walk is also another great tool to use to kind of have students go around the room and critique their classmates' designs, but also to get some inspiration if they're struggling with some things too. Last thing is the project recap and final results. So again, one of the most important things is about project-based learning, at least in my classes, we test a lot of our projects, right? So we do slingshot rockets, we make Rube Goldberg machines, and a couple other things, but we all test those machines, right? Or test those products. As I mentioned before, the process of designing and learning those skills is greater than the product of that. So what I mean by that is in my rubrics, you'll see that a lot of the language talks about more of the process of how they get to their final result rather than the product of their final result. Where I want to, take some of that, the stress of, having your rocket go 20 feet. I want to take some of that stress and not make it more about, having a rocket that actually flies. I want you to go through the process and learn those skills that I really am focusing on rather than seeing your rocket fly very far, right? So for me, I usually take about 10% of the grade and make that about the final product. I really care about the process. So along the process, we're going to talk more about things like, how did you make it? How did you come up with those ideas? What made you choose that specific design out of all the possible solutions that you had, right? So we'll go through and we'll talk about all those things, and that stuff is what I grade more, their reasoning and their justification for it. Whether it's right or wrong, I just want them to start thinking about what critical skills they need in order to make those decisions. For successful completion of a task, right, successful completion of a project, again, I only use it for about 10% of the grade, if that. I use 5 to 10%, somewhere in that neighborhood. So I really stress that process over the product. Lastly, for project recaps and final reviews, I like to have the students come up with some sort of reflection. And whether that's a final report, or whether that's, just, kind of a summary of their entire project, I just really want them to really reflect back and think about the project as a whole, right? I want them to think back and say, what did I learn? What did, what was easier? What was hard about this project? Did they encounter anything challenging that they maybe expected or didn't expect, right? I want them to think through those things. And really the biggest question is, if you had to do this project all over again, how would you do it differently, right? Knowing the knowledge you know now, what would you do differently if you had to redo your project, right? I'm not asking them to actually redo the project because we don't have the time for that kind of stuff, but to think about that in terms of, how would I do this project differently? Would I make it longer? Would I make it shorter? Would I make it heavier or lighter, right? Those are all things that I want them to think about. materials that they choose, right? Anything about the project that they can think about would be great as far as reflection goes, right? These reflections should really enforce what your objectives were back at the very beginning, right? So whenever I design lessons, the slingshot rocket in particular, right, I'm really stressing the design process. So I want them to go through all 8 steps. I want them to do ask questions. I want them to research, brainstorm, come up with some ideas, choose and justify them, develop a prototype, test and evaluate, analyze, and then publish the results, right? So I do a formal report with the rockets. And I really stress that entire process, but that's something that we've built to by that point. We've taken those steps before in smaller projects, and we focused on smaller steps or chunks of steps, and we've built up now to this big project where I really want them to use the entire design process in order to build their rocket, right? So I like to scaffold out a lot of my learning objectives and start small and then work our way towards these big lesson objectives where we're using the entire design process to come up with our projects. That's a lot of information to do or to digest as we do project-based learning. But as we have evolved to this virtual learning due to COVID, one of the things that I want to encourage you is that you can still do project-based learning. In the spring, I had the opportunity to kind of redesign some of my labs and some of my projects that I do to help kind of facilitate online learning. And I want to encourage you that it's still possible to do project-based learning online. You just have to work maybe a little bit extra to kind of modify some things and make sure that students have what they need. But you can do it, and I know you will. One of the challenges that I faced was that I'm not there to keep students on task. That was one of my biggest challenges. I saw a lot of students, sign in and different things, in the 11th hour, and it's really tough because sometimes, students have other things going on, especially, amidst the health crisis or, scare that we've been having. But one of those big elements, especially in project-based learning, is being there physically and helping those students to stay on track and maybe provide some inspiration at times. But I found that if you give specific daily objectives, if you break it out day by day, and you chunk it out a little bit, students have the ability to kind of focus a little bit more, and they usually stay on task a lot more throughout the entire process. By giving them a little bit more of a timeline, they have less questions of, how far should I get today or anything like that. But if you chunk it out just little by little and take that scaffold approach, I think you'll find that project-based learning can be actually really successful through virtual learning. Another thing is writing out clear and specific instructions. Again, I know it's tough to talk about every single scenario or trying to address every single question all at once, when you're writing out these instructions. But, I found that a lot of times, by posting to Google Classroom, in the stream, students have access to see all that stuff, and it allows them to kind of help each other out. And one of the cool things that I saw in some of my classes was, a student would post a question and another student would answer it before I got to it. And it was kind of cool to see, students helping each other out. But again, that's one of the things that, is my goal, is I want students to help each other out. I want it to be student-centered. I don't want it to be reliant on me for all the learning and things like that. So it was really awesome to see, students stepping up in that role in that way and helping me out by answering some of those questions. And I'd hop on and I'd reaffirm, hey, that is correct and this is where we're going. So it was really awesome just to see the students kind of take up and take some leadership role in some of that. One of the things again that I like to do is just keeping it simple. As we go through this online learning, don't make it harder on yourself than it has to be. One of the greatest things that I've learned is to just scaffold out these bigger projects. They may take a little bit longer than they normally would in class, but as long as students are continuing to learn the skills and completing the objectives that I have in mind, it's worth taking that little bit of extra time to allow students to, problem solve and critical think on their own. And if they have questions, then they have the time to come back and ask you, rather than, kind of going rapid fire and giving them these big projects to work on. I think another important aspect here is just to continue to adjust your expectations on, the building side of things. But as you adjust those expectations, maybe you can make them accountable in other areas, right? Maybe you can make them respond to their classmates, maybe post some of their ideas and give some feedback on their project designs. Maybe you could find an article or something that pertains to your topic or your project, and you can have them read and respond and make a response back that way. Just some other way to make them accountable and hold them accountable for that information that they're maybe not going to get instead of when we're not in the classroom. So those are some of the biggest project-based learning kind of building blocks and elements to make a very effective project-based learning environment. Now I'm going to talk about just an experience that I had this past year, and I actually worked with one of our special ed teachers on this. But one morning, the students had baked cookies as part of an experiment, and they were going around teacher to teacher and asking, if we could tell the difference between the actual recipe and the estimated recipe that they came up with, based on just looks and things like that, right? So it was really cool when they came in. It was awesome. I got chocolate chip cookies early in the morning, which is always a great way to start the day. But they started asking questions, right? Or I started asking them questions about it and what they were learning and how it was going, right? And they were all able to chime in and give responses, and they were telling me how excited they were about learning these different things, and it was just really cool. It was a really awesome time that we got to hang out together. But then they started asking me questions, right? Because I had fish tanks all around my room, and I had 0 fish in them at that point. I was just getting started with some of my aquaponics. If you're not familiar with aquaponics actually is growing fish in like a tank of sorts, and growing plants on top of them, right? So the idea behind it is the fish fertilize the plants, and the plants break down the nutrients in some of the fish poo, and they put it back in the water, and it's really healthy for the fish. So it's kind of like a big circle there where they're helping each other out, and each one of them is growing bigger and bigger. So a couple of the students had talked about, how that'd be really interesting. And it was awesome because the teacher at that point, Emmy Gaston, she is a special ed teacher at Slippery Rock High School. She was on board with it too. She really wanted to have the students come up and help out. So we kind of devised the plan and put it in place. But the students would come up 2 times a week. They kind of alternated, but they would come up and they'd measure the pH of the water. They'd observe the fish. They'd kind of see how long they were, how big they were, and then they started talking about the plants at that point, right? And they were writing all their observations down. And this was a really awesome thing because now students were able to take some of the information that they were learning in biology class or in chemistry class, and they're starting to apply it to a real life situation where something, where we could have it, benefit the students. And one of the coolest things was, we had different students come in and plant the seeds, and they were learning about the seeds at that time, the different types of things that you can have, right? So all in all, it was just a really great project, and Emmy really helped me out, and she really got this kind of all started. And I had a few other students help out with some of the design for the aquaponics and how it's going to run. But all in all, it was a big group effort that resulted in something that was really cool. The kids were really interested in. They would, at the bell, they would, leave the room like they were supposed to, and they would come up and they would find me, and they'd get their test kits out, and they'd start writing down their observations. And that's what real science is, right? That's what we want students to walk away with, is these real life experiences where they're invested in something that they actually want to be invested in, something that really interests them. So one of the, again, the coolest thing is that we were able to partner with different people across the building. It wasn't just with special ed, but we were able then to take some of that stuff, and we have a hydroponics garden, which is a self-sustained, no fish in it, but we add the nutrients, and we were able to take that with the health and wellness group, and we were able to take that into the cafeteria and show them how healthy living is, or some aspects of healthy living, and things that they could do at their homes. And it was really cool. We had students come up and pick lettuce right off the garden, and they went and they put it on their sandwich and ate it for lunch. And that's awesome to me. I love seeing students use stuff that we do in class in real life, whether it be in school or outside of school. I just think it's an awesome opportunity for kids to really diversify their learning and to come up with some really cool things. So I hope you had a great time. I know I'm a little short on time here, but I had planned to work through some of these different projects with you and do a lot of hands-on experience with you if we had time to be together. But again, due to COVID, we're taking precautions and not able to be together. But please, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'll be happy to get back to you anytime. If you need to work on some stuff before school, I'd be happy to talk with you or do a Google Meet or anything like that, and really walk you through some of these different steps and really help you out, kind of morph some of your curriculum into the project-based learning. So again, I appreciate you logging in and tuning in with me. I hope you and your family stay healthy and enjoy the rest of your summer. And check out some of these other awesome videos for Rock Ed Camp as you can. All right. So hey, have a great night, and see you later. Bye.